I'm so happy to be here with all of the parents and the educators, and I appreciate what you just said. However, and I also feel that the most important picture that was up there is the inclusion picture of Jesse with all of his classmates in the 6th grade. We moved to Massachusetts in 1994. Jesse had severe cerebral palsy, was nonverbal. We lived in New Jersey where there was not an integrated preschool, where there was not inclusion. I grew up in Massachusetts. I knew that Massachusetts at the time had better than the federal average as far as spending. It no longer does. And we moved back here to the one town that did not have inclusion. What we found when we moved here was that it was town by town. And I got a very, well, not a very quick education. I had a very slow learning curve, unlike Jesse, who had a good learning curve. And the book chronicles some of what it was like. I don't want you to think it's a how-to about how to fight the power, because it really isn't. It's really a celebration of Jesse's life. And it's a grief memoir in addition to being a celebration of his life, but it's also, the linear part of the book does cover what exactly it was like to learn, to be on this learning curve as a parent before the internet. And I tell this to young parents and they gasp, but it was before the internet. So, in the early days, we were fighting the medical community, quite frankly. We had a neurologist when Jesse was 4. When I said that Jesse had complete receptive language, we had a neurologist who said to me in front of Jesse, "He'll never be intellectually normal. Are you planning on having other children, Mrs. Cooper?" And it was about 2 weeks later that Jesse was playing with the puzzle that you saw in that slideshow with his occupational therapist, and she said, "Hand me the rectangle, hand me the square," and it would take him a full minute to tame his wavering arm to get to it. And every once in a while, the synapses in Jesse's brain would flare correctly, and he could actually utter a word. And he got to the octagon, and he said, "Oct, 8." And I looked at Chris, and I said, "You know, screw the itsy-bitsy spider. Let's give him Yeats. I think he's brilliant." And later on, I wrote a letter to that neurologist. And I said, "I know it's easy to confuse yourself with God because you have so many acolyte interns and so many parents desperate and hanging on your every word, but you are not only not God, you're a murderer of children's potential if you make comments like that when we don't know how the brain works. And by the way, you were right about one thing. He isn't intellectually normal. He's intellectually superior. And if we had listened to you, it would have been a self-fulfilling prophecy for Jesse." So that was our first wake-up call. Oh, gee, we're going to have to do a little of this on our own. I want to read to you some of the, a few of the things from this book that will kind of set the, I can't read you the entire struggle that happened. Suffice it to be said that I had to organize parents in our South Shore town and take on this SPED director who was quoted as saying that our children don't give anything back to society, so why should we spend money on them? So when we won our cash settlement that we didn't want, we set up the Jesse Cooper Give Back to Society scholarship that now goes out to a disabled kid every year in his high school. And after, thanks. That SPED director is no longer there, but what I'm talking to you about as parents is that you are your own strongest and best advocate for your child. You are your, at times, only advocate for your child. And it starts with you. And for the educators in the room, I just have 2 words: presume competence. solves everything. Presume competence. You know, we're having, I hadn't planned to talk about this, but we're having work done on our house right now. We've got this kid, this plumber, who comes in. Sweet kid. And he sees my book lying there, and he says, you know, I really don't read. I'm dyslexic. He said, you know, I love reading schematics, and I can figure out your whole plumbing problem, which is a whole different problem. And then he tells me that when he was in high school, in his SPED class, his SPED teacher said, everybody take a good look at George, because in a few years he's going to be asking you if you want fries with that. The fact is that kid still remembers this so hurtfully now that he is a successful plumber and probably making more than the liberal arts majors who just graduated from an expensive schools. But what breaks my heart is that this kid still carries that hurt around with him now. By the way, the special ed teacher who said that to him is now the head of special ed in that town. And this is where, as parents, you have to be aware of all of that kind of thing, and we have to protect our children from this. So I want to read to you a little bit now. First, I want to read to you, Jesse finally got onto a computer and was able to communicate. And what he did was he wrote his first poem when he was about 10. And it's about being nonverbal. It's called Inside Outside. On the inside, I walk. On the outside, I give. On the outside, I am mute. On the outside, I give. On the inside, I speak. On the inside, I walk. Well, I want to talk about what happened when we moved here and our first experience with school. School was the reason for the country living experiment, and it would be the testing ground. Jesse was placed in a classroom in a collaborative school program in a nearby town. Collaboratives in Massachusetts are put together from multiple school districts to share the cost of providing education to special needs students. Because I was still relatively clueless about the meaning of full inclusion for children with disabilities, I was happy for the scraps that were offered to us at first. On the first day of school, Jesse was excited. He'd had a great summer swimming in the pool, going for walks in the woods and on nearby Duxbury Beach, petting the animals at the Marshfield Fair. But the real adventure would be the new school, meeting new kids, learning new things. By the time we got him into our new green van, he was giddy with anticipation. But soon after we arrived at the collaborative that was housed in a regular elementary school, after we walked past the smiles and the greetings of his new principal, we reached his classroom. There we saw a message as clear as if it were a sign spanning the entry. You, Jesse Cooper, are disabled. Therefore, you are a second-class citizen. Jesse's small classroom was at the very back of the school, an afterthought storeroom with no windows. All the other classrooms in this modern school, the ones for the normals, had windows looking out on trees and grass and sun. In Jesse's cramped place of learning, huge stinking blue gym mats used for the high school wrestling team were stored against the walls. Jesse's classmates were all severely physically disabled, like him, but cognitively, they were on every point of the spectrum. There was a little girl who was paraplegic but verbally and mentally intact, alongside a little boy in a wheelchair with limited learning abilities. His only intellectual diversion was a balloon tied to his wheelchair, which the therapist urged him to hit. When I left Jesse in that smelly room, it felt like I was abandoning him to an institution. I felt ashamed, as if I had let a stranger walk up and spit on my child. I was devastated. Why did we move here? At least his segregated class in Hoboken had windows. When I think about Jesse's early education, I realize that it wasn't Jesse who had the slow learning curve. It was me. I was ignorant about how to make inclusion work. It took me forever, it seems, to figure out how Jesse could go to school in a community of peers, both disabled and non-disabled, and learn alongside them. But the most important thing I learned from that first year at the collaborative was that Jesse would not necessarily be learning at school. His teachers and therapists were kind, responsible women with low expectations for Jesse. Because he was nonverbal, they provided a homeschool book that listed what happened that day at school. Before we could even consider the question of Jesse's learning, I became obsessed with the stinking gym mats. By the end of the first week at school, I was in the principal's office demanding that they be removed. That scenario followed a script I had enacted a few times by them, playing a stock character, enraged mother, with the medical profession and in the world of education. The generic plot line goes like this. I entered the office trying unsuccessfully to hide my quivering outrage. The person in charge, usually a man, asks me to sit down. I remain standing. I state my case in clip sentences that sometimes get away from me, revealing the outrage I am trying to mask with professional tones. After I make a list of demands, a figurative plexiglass shield comes down from the ceiling in front of the person in charge, who assumes a smooth professional demeanor meant to reassure the crazy lady opposite him. The person in charge smiles, takes notes, does nothing. For 2 months, Jesse's homeschool book resonated with escalating threats. I wrote in the book, hope mats are gone, otherwise R, the principal, is dead meat. The mats were finally removed. It took much longer to raise the school's expectations for Jesse. Around mid-year, I finally got his teachers to agree to challenge him from the homeschool book. I was delighted to hear that Jesse finally showed you guys a little of what he knows. That's great. Actually, when I spell with him, I don't tell him how to spell the word. I usually just put 2 letters on one side of his magnetic board, like AR, and a few letters on the other side, like CB or J, and ask him what makes the word car or jar or bar. That way, he figures it out for himself. It took 6 months to get the teachers to let him to spell out words instead of spelling out the words for him. The speech therapist at the school had no expectations for Jesse at all. Let's call her Madame. She was French, and upon my first meeting with her, she gargled at me with such a slushy accent that I regarded her with the incredulity of Alice meeting the hookah-smoking caterpillar. At this point, you may be wondering why a school system would hire a speech therapist with an accent thick as Vichy-Sauce. You are now journeying with me through the looking glass of special education. The answer to your question is jam tomorrow, jam yesterday, but never jam today. With all the gravitas of the Red Queen, Madame pronounced Jesse blind, and her written report said he couldn't visually direct his gaze. The following year, Jesse defeated his dad in a video game using his eyes to move the cursor on the eye gaze computer at the Boston College campus school. It was obvious that Madame also considered Jesse mentally challenged. No wonder. I don't think he ever understood a word she said. I mercilessly mimicked her at home. In between feeding Jesse spoonfuls of beef stew during dinner, I pursed my lips and announced, Jesse, regardez-moi, look at me, look at Madame. I struck an Edith Piaf pose by the oak table, my hands framing my face. Ah, mon petit chou, am I not jolie? Direct your gaze to me, only me. But it really wasn't funny. How could Jesse be helped by someone who firmly believed he was blind and mentally challenged? We decided to look elsewhere for speech therapy. What happened after our collaborative event was I asked finally that Jesse be included. What I learned the hard way was what dumping was. Jesse was included in first grade, which meant that they put him in the classroom with no supports whatsoever. And when he started tantruming 3 times a week, I was told it was behavior, because Jesse didn't really want to be there because we let him do whatever he wanted to do at home. This led to, and this also was a slow learning curve for me. It took me forever. I appeased these teachers because I wanted it to work. I wanted my kid to be educated, and I didn't know what else to do. This is about guilt, corrosive, molten lava guilt that puts your soul in the burn unit for life. And this is about forgiving yourself and what it takes to become a mother from hell. I am sitting at my kitchen desk reading Jesse's homeschool book from his first few months of inclusion in the first grade of our local elementary school. Brandy has pasted a laughing picture of Jesse riding his horse on the cover of the battered blue notebook. The notebook should have been a means for parent, aide, and teacher to report the daily events at school of a child who doesn't communicate in the usual way. Instead, it reads like a cryptogram, and it soon becomes clear that I was unaware of the code. I don't even recognize myself, this perky yet cringing poseur trying to stay upbeat on the home pages of the homeschool book as Jesse's school year unwinds toward an inevitable implosion. When I ask myself now, 14 years later, how I missed the signs, I still don't have an answer. Homeschool book. Jesse had a great first day, Jesse's teacher. Jesse had a great night, Jesse's mother. It went steeply downhill from there. Jesse's teacher was in her early 20s, tall, willowy, baby-faced, and baby-voiced, and very, very sure of herself. She was convinced of the rightness of everything. She had read in her textbooks about how to run her classrooms, and she was eager to put her newfound knowledge into practice. She had volunteered to accept Jesse into her first grade classroom, and I was happy she wanted him. Jesse was assigned an aide, a large middle-aged blonde who was also the mother of 3 children. The aide was to give Jesse snacks and lunch, assist him in the classroom, and deliver him to the occupational and speech therapists who worked with him in a separate location. Jesse was the only child in the elementary school in a wheelchair, the only nonverbal child, the only child with severe disabilities. According to Jesse's teacher, there was appropriate behavior and inappropriate behavior for first grade, and Jesse's behavior was mostly inappropriate. He cried a lot. He cried when the aide tried to make him hold a crayon and draw pictures. He cried when he bit his tongue and drew blood. He cried when he was constipated. He cried when the aide left his leg braces on for 3 hours when the limit was 20 minutes. After which the braces, which were made of unyielding plastic and encased Jesse's legs up to his knees, would leave welts. And they were hot. No wonder they made him cry. But the crying was disruptive to the rest of the class, Jesse's teacher informed me in her rounded cursive. They were going to throw him out. He would be evicted for crying. God, please let them want to teach my child. Please make him stop crying. What if they don't let him stay in school? These fears triumphed over the overprotective mother who had managed to keep Jesse safe this far into his educational career. But I never wrote about these fears to Jesse's teacher when I responded in the homeschool books. Even my handwriting looks different on these pages. My usual script is a series of hurried, jagged peaks and contrasting generous loops. But that's when I am myself, not someone cowed by authority. In the homeschool book, I used my old Catholic schoolgirl penmanship, as if my persona had reverted back to those years when I was told what to do at school and kept my head down to avoid trouble, like a broken prisoner of war. It escalated for Jesse. It got worse and worse. And finally, Brandy, who is here today, Jesse's caregiver, who was with us for 10 years, who had just started working with us. I asked Brandy to go into the school and see what was going on, because Jesse did not behave that way at home. Brandy came back, and it took me a few hours to get the information from her. And what she told me was that in front of Jesse, the aide was saying, "He don't belong here." I mean, between you and me, Brandy, we both know where he's going to end up, which is why he was crying. The teacher chimed in to say, she really needs to learn to let go because we don't know the life expectancy of a CP kid, which is normal. When I found out, suffice it to say I went postal. this is what happened afterwards. Chris sat at the table deceptively still. Then he abruptly picked Jesse up and lay with him on Jesse's bed, cradling him, crooning. I walked to the phone in a trance of fury and called the principal. I wanted a meeting now, this minute, this very second, so I could confront them all. The aide, the teacher, the special ed director, too. He was the one who had set up this scenario. Did he plan this debacle from the beginning? Was he aided and abetted by the inexperienced teacher and the casually cruel aide? Did he hope that by dumping Jesse, the program would fail and we'd go away? It was Friday. The principal arranged a meeting for the following Monday. I didn't know if I could wait until then. In the last few minutes, I had joined the berserker tribe of mothers. Those who go into battle without any armor but rage. Mad as dogs, fierce as wolves, they fight to the death. We did fight, and we did get, we got to have input. The whole fight was about, they refused to let us have any input as to who the aide was with our kid. We asked that Brandy be the aide at no cost to the school, and they said she wasn't appropriate. Even though she knew how to do his computer, she was a CNA, and she would never, ever say in front of Jesse that he didn't belong there. So for 2 years, we battled the special ed director. We hired a wonderful lawyer, and there were 6 other lawsuits that year because I had sent out a letter to the parents saying, are any of you finding what's happening? And yeah, it turned out they were. I'm talking about community organizing here. I am talking about, we got together in a room in the library. I had no clue what I was doing, and we used the media. We got onto the school board so that there were parents with disabilities finally on the school board that had an input into what was happening there. The SPED director's contract wasn't renewed, and our children became included. And I just want to finish by reading what happened in Jesse's case. Jesse was always a warrior boy. He fought for survival in the NICU, pulling out his respirator tube after 2 weeks as if to say, I can breathe on my own now, damn it. He returned to school while we were still fighting for a valid individual education plan. He knew he was going back to a place where he'd been ignored and abused. He had no fear whatsoever, no hesitancy, no crying, no behavior. He was helpless, but he wasn't afraid like Chris and I were. Jesse just wanted to be included with his peers. And when Mrs. Champa, his tutor, adapted the curriculum so that he did what the other kids did, just differently, he mastered the work and he soared like a hawk. He still had bad days. He still had seizures. He still had bouts of horrifying dystonia, plus the usual coughs, colds, and stomach aches. But in school, he had supports. I want to talk about the letters that we received after Jesse's death. The letters from Jesse's teacher after his death were a validation and a recognition of his daily struggle that strengthened everybody who was a part of it. Death brings hyperbole, flowery and sentimental descriptions of shimmering heavenly vistas when people must write a note of condolence. That goes double for the death of a child. But Jesse's teachers were honest and brave like he was. They told their real feelings, whether expressed formally or casually. They said he had taught them about love and trust and to enjoy each day, that he inspired them to live up to the level he set for himself, and that he had given more to them than they could ever give back in return. Enough. It's starting to feel like I'm channeling some soul-dead movie critic using over-the-top descriptions like a triumph of the spirit, a monumental achievement, and inspirational to review my son's life. But I want to tell you this story. When he was in the 6th grade, Jesse and I went to Prague to visit Chris, filming The Bourne Identity. We returned home to Boston via Paris. Jesse kept a journal for the class and reported that Charles de Gaulle Airport was a nightmare of inaccessibility. That was an understatement. After we landed there, the official answer from every airport employee we approached was, "Je suis désolé," when we asked about elevators. Every elevator in the airport was out of commission. Time was growing short for us to make our connection upstairs for the transatlantic flight home. Chris became furious and hefted Jesse's travel chair onto an escalator, muttering his own version of French. But he hadn't counted on the 3 round concrete barriers at the top of the stairs that prevented us from pushing Jesse's wheelchair through. We fell backward into everyone behind us like a bad Three Stooges routine. Strangers were screaming, Jesse was laughing, and Chris was horrified. Jesse's teacher used the escalator incident as a lesson in letter writing for the class. They're petitioning to hold the Olympics in France, she told the students. To whom would you write a letter about what happened to Jesse? We have the letters the class wrote. They wrote to the mayor of Boston. They wrote to their senators. They wrote to the Olympics committee. In the letters, they told about Jesse not being able to get from one place to another easily at Charles de Gaulle Airport. Some letters mentioned elderly people or parents with babies in strollers. A room full of 11-year-olds were now thinking about community, about not just how Jesse gets around, but how old people and young people and how to make it easier for everyone. Outraged at obstacles like those at the de Gaulle happening to someone they knew. Or as one kid put it, "Dear Mr. Bush, do you know what happened to my friend Jesse?" Inspirational. Thank you.